Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show that takes these monumental eras, the times that really define philosophy, politics, and power, and distills them down into the essential knowledge you need.
And today, we are going way back.
We're traveling to North India, specifically to these incredibly dynamic, almost explosive centuries between roughly 600 and 300 BCE.
This isn't just a period of, slow, gradual change. This is the true hinge moment for the entire subcontinent. I mean, if you want to understand classical Indian thought, sophisticated statecraft, or even the origins of urban life, you have to look here.
Right. This is what scholars call the early historical period.
It is. And we're going to start, maybe unusually, not at the beginning, but right at the end of the Buddhist life.
With a story that I think perfectly captures this sense of decay, memory, and transformation that just defines these centuries. It's from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta.
Which is the narrative of the Buddha's final passing away. And the scene is just incredibly evocative. It's so dramatic.
So the Buddha has chosen this town, Kusinara, for his parinibbana, his death and ultimate release.
And his loyal attendant, Ananda, is just... He's dismayed. He's absolutely appalled by this choice. He looks at Kusinara and he sees this humble, almost insignificant little town.
Basically a backwater.
Totally. And certainly not a setting fit for the death of the Enlightened One.
So Ananda challenges him. He says, why here? I mean, look around. There are magnificent, teeming cities. You've got Champa, Rajagriha, Shravasti, Varanasi. These are centers of immense wealth, of political power. Why would you choose this place?
And the Buddha's reply is... Well, it's a profound commentary on history itself. He just brushes aside Ananda's objection, and he explains that this little town, Kusinara, was once the magnificent capital Kusavati.
The home of this mighty king Mahasudasana.
And then he launches into this incredible description of its former glory. He says it measured 12 yojanas east to west and 7 yojanas north to south.
Okay, so a yojan, that's an ancient unit of measurement, right? It's not exact.
Yeah. Not at all. It varies wildly. It could be 8 miles, 10 miles, sometimes less. But even if we take a really conservative estimate, 12 yojanas across means this city was maybe 60 or 70 miles wide.
That's not a city. That's a sprawling megalopolis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Buddha confirms that scale by describing the sounds of the ancient city. He says it was resounding day and night with the noise of elephants, horses, drums, lutes, songs, and this continuous loud cry from the people, "Eat, drink, and be merry." That phrase says it all.
That description of this massive, bustling, prosperous urban center, now reduced to this small, forgotten town, that is our perfect lens for today. Our mission is to dive deep into this pivotal age, this window from 600 to 300 BCE, which saw the culmination of political centralization, explosive urban growth in the Ganga Valley, and at the exact same time, this intense philosophical revolution.
And to do that, we're relying on a really diverse stack of sources, which forces us to compare and contrast. I mean, we're drawing from the Buddhist Pali Canon and the Jaina texts.
Which have very different perspectives.
Very different. Then we have the technical genius of Panini's Ashtadhyayi, a grammar book that gives us this accidental snapshot of its time. We're also using dynastic histories from the Puranas. And crucially, we're looking at the hard archaeological data.
Which means the distinctive northern black polished ware pottery.
And the earliest examples we have of silver punchmark coins.
Okay, let's unpack this, and I think we have to start with the biggest chronological puzzle. We have to anchor the life of the Buddha, because that one date sets the baseline for pretty much all early historical events and dynasties in North India.
It really is the cornerstone of early Indian history. The precise date of the Buddha's parinibbana, his death, it's just so crucial. I mean, if we shift that date by even 50 years, it pushes entire historical sequences.
Like the reigns of the Magadhan kings, the rise of the Nandas.
The timing of the early Buddhist councils, all of it gets pushed forward or back. It radically alters our whole understanding of what caused what.
So what are the major competing chronologies that historians have to wrestle with, especially when there's no contemporary, written history?
Well, the oldest and most traditional one is what's called the uncorrected long chronology. This comes mainly from the Sri Lankan chronicles, the Dipavamsa and Mahabamsa.
Okay.
And they state that 218 years passed between the parinibbana and the consecration of the Emperor Ashoka. So that would place the Buddha's death around 544 or 543 BCE.
And that date is still used, right?
Oh, yes. It's still accepted by many Theravada communities today. It's the traditional start of the Buddhist era.
But that date has been, pretty heavily challenged, or at least modified by Western and a lot of Indian scholars.
Yes. For a long time, most scholarly consensus has favored what's called the corrected long chronology.
And that's based on what?
It modifies the timeline by linking it to later Greek records and, more importantly, Ashoka's own inscriptions. And that calculation places the death of the Buddha around circa 480 BCE.
So that's the working date most academics use.
It's the one that's still widely retained, yes.
Yeah. But then there are these little details, these tiny, intriguing clues that threaten to push the date even later, maybe into the 4th century BCE.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. Recent work on the lists of monastic elders in the Pali Chronicles suggests that some of these figures would have had to live impossibly long lives if we stick to that 544 BCE date. So a later date seems more plausible.
And the most famous archaeological clue actually comes from Ashoka himself.
It does. It's the Aurora version of Ashoka's Minor Rock Edict I. This inscription seems to suggest a period of 256 years passed between the Buddha's death and the issuing of the edict itself.
Wow, so if you calculate that.
If you calculate that based on the latest possible dates for Ashoka's reign, it pushes the potential Parinibbana date forward pretty significantly, maybe towards 400 or even 350 BCE.
Which tells us that even in Ashoka's time, the exact chronology was probably disputed or at least a bit fluid.
Exactly. But for now, until we get some kind of conclusive evidence that forces a universal shift, historians pretty much continue to use that C480 BCE date for their working chronologies.
Okay, so keeping C480 BCE in our minds as our approximate center, let's look at the literary foundations that map out this revolutionary period. The Buddhist Pali Canon is obviously our bedrock here.
The Pali Canon is fundamental, just because of its sheer volume and its geographical focus. We mostly rely on the core books of the Sutta Pitaka, the collections of the Buddha's discourses, and the entire Vinaya Pitaka, which details the rules of the monastic order.
And these texts were composed over a couple of centuries.
Between the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE, yes. And they give us this rich description of life, society, and politics, localized almost entirely in the Middle Ganga Valley.
Which is exactly the heartland of our deep dive, modern Bihar and eastern Uttar Pradesh.
Precisely. But the canon is, it's explicitly a religious text. To ground it in the secular reality of the time, we have to turn to this accidental, almost unlikely historical treasure, Panini's Ashtadyai. Panini is just a genius. He's working in the 5th or 4th century BCE. And he wasn't a historian or a philosopher, he was a grammarian. His work summarized the rules of Sanskrit grammar in nearly 4,000 highly compressed aphorisms, or sutras.
It's such an accurate, precise technical achievement that it basically marked the transition from the older Vedic Sanskrit to the new, streamlined classical Sanskrit.
It did.
So I find this absolutely fascinating. Why is a technical grammar book from 2,500 years ago so vital for historians?
Because to illustrate these really complex grammatical rules, Panini used real-world contemporary examples. So he incidentally referred to thousands of aspects of his society. Places, specific political groups, monetary units, weights, customs, institutions that existed in his world. These incidental references give historians this unparalleled, objective snapshot of the political and economic reality of the time that no other document provides with such technical precision.
It's history embedded in linguistics.
It's like finding a detailed map hidden inside a dictionary.
So let's contrast Panini's descriptive account with the Brahmanical prescriptive texts.
And that contrast is critical. We have the Brahmanical Dharma Sutras and Griya Sutras, dating roughly from 800 to 400 BCE. These texts are attempts to regulate society. They're prescriptive, telling people how they should live.
Setting out these ideal rules for marriage, property, occupation, social hierarchy.
Yes, they represent the Brahmanical ideal, and you can see them often struggling to contain the volatile social reality of the time.
And the Buddhist and Jaina texts, by contrast, are often more descriptive of that social reality. They're offering alternative perspectives and highlighting the flaws or inconsistencies in the Brahmanical system.
Exactly. So historians have to read the Dharma Sutras kind of against the grain to see where the Brahmanical system was defensively trying to impose order, versus reading the Buddhist texts for a more localized day-to-day perspective on the lives of, say, merchants and kings. And tying all these literary threads together is the central archaeological marker of the period, Northern Black Polished Ware, or NBPW. NBPW is the physical signature of this entire age of political and economic transformation. It's immediately recognizable. It's a deluxe high-end pottery.
So it's made from fine, well-processed clay. It's wheel-made and incredibly durable. I've read that some of the shurs are only 1.5 millimeters thick.
It's amazingly thin.
And what about that distinctive high-gloss sheen? It looks almost metallic sometimes.
It does, and it's not a simple polish. The brilliance was achieved through a highly sophisticated manufacturing process. The pots were probably coated with a liquid clay slip, maybe containing hematite and some natural alkaline materials.
And then fired at very high temperatures.
Extremely high temperatures in a tightly controlled, reducing atmosphere. So an oxygen-starved atmosphere. This intense heat and the lack of oxygen created that glossy, jet black, or sometimes golden brown, metallic finish.
And why is that sophisticated manufacturing process so important for our deep dive?
Because it signals specialization. This kind of technique required specialized labor, high-grade kilns, and centralized production. It wasn't something every household could just whip up.
It indicates a society that can support full-time, specialized artisans, a cornerstone of urbanism.
Exactly. And the other major significance is just its vast geographic spread.
It's unprecedented.
It really is. NBPW has been found at nearly 1,500 sites across the entire subcontinent, from Taxila in Pakistan down to Amaravati, and from Gujarat all the way across to Bengal.
And that widespread, uniform distribution is crucial evidence.
It proves an intense level of interregional interaction and a widespread cultural similarity, which provided the necessary stability and connections for political consolidation. It paved the way for the great trade networks we'll discuss later.
And significantly, this early phase of NBPW is synchronous with the first appearance of punch-marked silver coins,
which signals the economic revolution of money.
So we have this culturally unified, economically stimulating ground, and on this stage, the political landscape just explodes into the age of the Mahajanapadas.
The Salasa Mahajanapada. The 16 great states, they dominated the 6th century BCE, and they stretched geographically from Gandhara in the far northwest all the way to Anga in the east.
The sources, particularly the Buddhist Anguttara Nikaya, list them all. But who are the real political heavyweights in this constant jockeying for power? Well, the 16 states were pretty quickly reduced to a struggle between the big four powerful states in the core Ganga Valley, Magadha, Kosala, Vatsa, and Avanti. And within this landscape, we see two fundamentally different types of governance vying for supremacy.
First, you have the monarchies, or rajas.
These were centralized kingdoms like Kosala and Anga, ruled by a hereditary king, a raja.
And their internal structure was pretty simple and decisive. Relations between these states were characterized by continuous shifting alliances, often secured through strategic royal marriage ties, but also constant warfare or temporary truces.
The objective was always consolidation and expansion under a single leader. Always. Then you have the non-monarchical states, the Ganas or Sanghas. We often translate them as republics, but that's not quite right, is it? I think it's misleading. They were true oligarchies. Power was held by a large aristocratic council or a ruling elite, almost always drawn exclusively from the Kshatriya warrior class.
Think of the Vajis, the Mallas, or the Buddha's own Sakya clan. The common people had absolutely no say in governance.
So what did corporate governance look like in practice for these ruling councils?
It was defined by a strong corporate element. The ultimate authority resided in the chief, the Ganapati or Sanghamukhya, and his council. They'd meet in a large assembly hall, the Santhagara.
And decisions were made by consensus.
Crucially, yes. Important business war, peace, internal law was transacted through deliberation and consensus. If consensus failed, they'd resort to voting. They used wooden pieces called salakas.
And they were gathered and counted by a carefully chosen, impartial official.
The Salaka Gawapaka, yes, a very organized system.
That description makes them sound highly evolved, maybe even more stable than a single hereditary ruler. But the sources consistently portray their model as being really fragile. Why?
That is the core paradox. Governance through deliberation was their moral asset. It fostered unity among the elite clans, but it was also their critical weakness.
Because they were based on clan kinship.
Which made them brittle. Monarchies, though they were prone to succession crises, could act quickly and decisively. Sanghas were often paralyzed by internal discord, jealousy among the leading families, or just simple, prolonged debate.
So while the king of Magadha could just decide to attack, the Vaji council might still be arguing over the tax levy needed to fund the defense.
Precisely. And Magadha was very keen to exploit that weakness. This brings us to that famous case study, the Vajis and the Magadhan king Ajatashatru. The Vaji confederacy was considered the strongest of all the Sanghas. And the episode in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta provides this incredible political blueprint. Ajatashatru is determined to defeat the Vajis, so he sends his Brahmana minister, Vasakara, to the Buddha.
And the minister is there to subtly gauge the Buddha's opinion on how they might be defeated.
The Buddha's response is a masterclass in political science, and it's focused entirely on internal resilience. He details the 7 conditions for Vaji welfare and prosperity.
And they're all about social and ethical cohesion, not military hardware.
Not at all. He outlines that they will prosper as long as they meet often and carry out their undertakings in concord, respect their elders, uphold ancient traditions, protect women, and support the monks.
And the Buddha confirms that as long as they stick to these 7 points, the Vajis cannot be overcome.
Vasakara recognized immediately that the Vajis could not be defeated in battle without diplomacy or breaking up their alliance. He realized the only path was to internally corrupt them, to sow seeds of discord among the aristocratic families.
And the source material is pretty explicit that Vasakara spent years doing this, just eroding the conquered that was their greatest strength.
It shows that their internal consensus was literally their defensive wall. And the tragedy of this political dynamic is maybe best illustrated by the fate of the Sakyas, the Buddha's own clan, which was annihilated because of clan pride.
The Sakya deception involving King Prasenajit of Kosala.
Right, so Prasenajit, the Kosalan king, wanted to marry a Sakya princess. The Sakyas were intensely proud of their Kshatriya purity, and they looked down on the Kosalans as inferior.
But they were afraid of refusing such a powerful king.
So they chose this disastrous middle route. They sent a woman named Vasabhakatiya, who was the beautiful daughter of a Sakya chief, but her mother was a slave woman.
And they deliberately concealed her low parentage.
They did. She married the king, and she bore him a son, Vidudapa. The deception was only discovered years later when Vidudapa visited his maternal grandfather's home and found out about his mother's lineage.
And the revelation infuriated Prasenajit.
He initially disowned his wife and son, stripping them of their status. But the damage was done. Vidudapa grew up harboring this deep resentment for the Sakya's pride and the deception they played on his father.
So when he eventually became king?
When Vidudapa succeeded his father, that deep personal shame fueled his political ambition. He led an army to exact a brutal revenge, massacring the Sakyas in retribution for their arrogance and the lie they told.
It's a story that just encapsulates the ultimate fate of these kin-based oligarchies.
Their reliance on strict, often arrogant lineage purity proved to be a fatal weakness when they were facing the aggressive, centralized ambition of the rising monarchies. The stage is now completely dominated by one power, Magadha. This state systematically translated political ruthlessness and strategic advantage into the foundation of the first true North Indian Empire. And the sources make it clear. The rise of Magadha was based on geography and resources, not just military might. They were basically playing with an advantage right from the start.
So let's detail those advantages. What made Magadha's location so superior to, say, Kosala or Vaxa?
Well, their strategic capital locations were just unbeatable. Their initial capital, Rajagriha, was a natural hill fortress surrounded by 5 easily defended hills, offering protection and surveillance.
And later they shifted to Pataliputra,
which was a masterful strategic move. Pataliputra was protected by its incredible location at the junction of the Ganga and Sun rivers, and also near the Gandak and Gogra. This positioned the capital to control all the major riverine trade routes.
And beyond control of commerce, they controlled key natural resources.
They were uniquely situated. The core Ganga Valley provided this immensely fertile soil, guaranteeing the agricultural surplus needed to feed a large, non-farming population.
Which is crucial for supporting a standing army and a bureaucracy.
Exactly. And furthermore, they had proximity to dense forests, which provided crucial timber for construction, and most importantly, war elephants.
Elephants, timber, rivers, and grain. A perfect recipe for centralization. And the trajectory really began with the Haryanka dynasty.
Starting with Bimbisara, who ruled from about 545 to 493 BCE. He was the great consolidator, the first ruler to take the title Sinya, which means one who maintains a standing army.
And that was revolutionary.
It was. Instead of relying on clan levies or temporary mercenaries, he used state revenues to maintain a permanent professional force. And he consolidated power through both force. He annexed Anga and political marriage, famously gaining Kashi as a dowry from Kosala, which boosted his treasury and his legitimacy.
Bimbisara's son, Ajatashatru, is the one who really initiated the phase of ruthless expansion.
Yes. Ajatashatru, who reigned from about 493 to 462 BCE, and who's known in the Buddhist texts as a patricide, was just relentless. He crushed Kosala, and culminated his expansionist phase with that long, protracted war against a Vajji confederacy.
Overcoming the very people the Buddha predicted were invincible if they just maintained conquered.
And his success against the Vajjis wasn't just organizational, it was technological.
The Jaina sources detail this, right?
They're explicit about the innovative weaponry Ajatashatru deployed to dismantle the oligarchies. He used a massive stone-hurling catapult, possibly one of the earliest known siege weapons of its kind, capable of just reducing fortifications.
And there was the mace chariot.
Even more dramatic was the Rathamushala, or mace chariot. It was essentially an armored vehicle with whirling maces or sharp blades attached, designed to just tear through infantry ranks.
So this military modernization gave Magadha an edge that raw clan bravery just couldn't match, not a chance. And this relentless expansion sets the stage for the true climax of Magadhan power, the Nanda dynasty. The Nandas, from about 364 to 324 BCE, represent this profound shift. Their origins, as noted by Puranic and Greek sources, were highly controversial.
Oh, very. The founder, Mahapadma, was often disparaged as being of low, maybe Shudra lineage. Puranas say he was the son of a king and a lower caste woman, while Greek accounts say he was a barber who seized power. They were the ultimate nouveau-rich rulers.
And yet, despite their despised origins, their imperial reach and authority were absolute.
Mahapadma Nanda claimed the title Ekarat, which means sole sovereign, and he was known as the uprooter of the Kshatriyas. They built an unprecedented, massive state apparatus, collecting vast taxes and controlling resources that let them field a truly formidable army.
And it's the Greek accounts detailing Alexander's campaign that give us the measure of the Nanda dynasty's military might, purely through its deterrent effect.
The Greek sources, referring to the last Nanda king, Dhanananda, describe an army so large it was terrifying. Curtius and Diodorus Siculus give estimates of 200,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry.
And a massive corps of 4,000 to 6,000 war elephants.
To put that into perspective, the sight of a disciplined, professional army of that scale, backed by hundreds of battle-hardened elephants, was enough to stop the world's greatest conqueror in his tracks.
Alexander had defeated every army in his path, including the elephants of Porus. But when his soldiers reached the Beas River and heard these numbers, they mutinied.
They refused to march further east. They were exhausted, of course, but crucially, they were demoralized by the sheer, unquantifiable size of the force they would have to face, led by a ruthless ruler who controlled the entire Ganga basin.
So the Nandas ended Alexander's expansion in India through sheer deterrent force.
But we should remember, before Alexander, the subcontinent's northwest had already been interacting with the wider world through the Persian Empire.
Right. In the 6th century BCE, the Achaemenid Persian Empire under Darius Salih included the Indus Valley region as its 20th satrapy or province.
And it was reportedly the richest satrapy. It demanded a tribute of 360 talents of gold dust, a massive sum that really speaks to the wealth being generated in the Indus region at the time.
And the lasting impact of this century or so of Persian control wasn't really political. It was more cultural and administrative.
Absolutely. The key long-term legacy was the introduction of the Kharosthi script. This script, derived from Aramaic, the official language of the Persian Empire, was used in the region and later adopted by Ashoka in his northwestern edicts.
A crucial step in Indian epigraphy.
It was. Then, of course, came Alexander's intense, brief campaign in 327-326 BCE, which focused only on that northwestern rim.
A lightning strike.
It was. After defeating Porus, Alexander encountered this incredibly fierce resistance, particularly from the fiercely independent oligarchic Gannus in the region, like the Malloy. These clan-based groups fought with desperation, seeing Macedonian rule as an existential threat to their freedom. And this resistance produced one of the most famous and maybe most foolhardy anecdotes of Alexander's career, the siege of the Malloy citadel. Arrian preserved this story so vividly. Alexander, frustrated by the slow pace of the siege, grabs a ladder and starts climbing the wall himself. Several bodyguards follow, but the ladder breaks under their combined weight.
Leaving Alexander isolated on the battlement, exposed to a shower of enemy darts and arrows.
He was alone, trapped between the outer wall and the heavily armed Malloy inside.
And his decision was just breathtakingly reckless.
Completely. Realizing he couldn't stay on the rampart without being instantly killed and determined not to die ignobly, he leaped down inside the citadel, facing the entire garrison alone. He just fought until his desperate reinforcements could smash through the gate to save him.
And that intensity of resistance showed Alexander the difficulty of conquering the vast interior of India.
It confirmed the rumors of the Nanda power, and it led to his eventual retreat at the Beas.
So these Magadhan empire builders required immense wealth, and that was fueled by trade and urbanization. Let's shift our focus to the economic engine of this revolution. The period 600–300 BCE is fundamentally defined by the rise of a new urban footprint.
It's a genuine second urbanization, centuries after the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. And we see the clear emergence of specialized urban centers. The texts even give us terminology that suggests distinct functions.
What were those functional distinctions?
Well, we see Nigama, which referred generally to market towns, centers primarily dedicated to commercial activities and craft specialization. Then Rajdhani was clearly the capital city, the administrative and military center.
And then the Mahanagaras.
The great cities, which had combined all these functions, massive centers like Rajagriha, Shravasti, and Kaushambi.
And the key difference from earlier periods is that many of these major centers mentioned in the texts have now been confirmed archaeologically. They often show continuity of occupation right through to the Mauryan period.
Sites like Taxila in the northwest, Kaushambi on the Yamuna, and Rajagriha in Magadha, they all confirm the textual accounts. They show evidence of rapid growth and complexity.
Even though it's hard to excavate because many of these cities are still occupied today.
Right. But we can see the physical evidence of this shift. Atranjikara in the Ganga Valley provides some of the best evidence for the physical transformation from a simple settlement to a complex urban center during this time.
What did those excavations reveal?
Atranjikara showed a dramatic increase in settlement size and density, indicating an influx of population. There was a clear transition from simple wattle and daub or mud houses to more permanent structures using mud brick and eventually burnt brick.
And critically, a massive increase in the number and range of iron objects.
This is where iron truly shifts from being an occasional material to being the bedrock of the economy.
Exactly. For the first time in this phase, we find iron agricultural tools, plowshares and sickles appearing in large numbers. This means efficient iron tools transformed food production, leading to a permanent agricultural surplus that could sustain the non-farming, specialized urban population.
Furthermore, the discovery of highly specialized tools, like iron plumb bobs for construction alignment, confirms highly organized and sophisticated building practices within the city walls.
This must have required an explosion of specialized occupations and commerce. The list of professions must have been immense.
The texts provide a staggering list. It reflects a highly specialized economy, far removed from the simple life of a farming village. We find everything from scribes, lakaka, and physicians, veja, to accountants, ganana, as well as entertainers like acrobats and magicians,
And the specialized, highly accomplished courtesan, the Ganika.
who often held a prominent public and expensive position in the urban environment alongside ordinary prostitutes, the vesi.
And these professions weren't isolated. They quickly began to formalize through corporate organizations what we would call guilds.
The emergence of the shreni, or puga, the guilds, is a defining feature of this economy. These organizations of artisans, traders, moneylenders, and farmers laid down rules, standardized prices, and governed their professions.
And the Brahmanical Dharma Sutras acknowledged their authority.
The Gautama Dharma Sutra stipulated that kings should make legal decisions only after listening to the relevant guild authority. That proves their power and corporate recognition.
This economic sophistication then necessitated the introduction of money as a universal medium of exchange.
The introduction of currency is a huge qualitative change. This period is the first time we see widespread use of punchmark silver coins, like the kahapana. The coins were often standardized in weight and purity, signaling that economic transactions were now happening on a scale that simple barter just couldn't manage anymore.
And once you have money lending.
Usury became absolutely prominent. The Pali texts are rife with references to instruments of credit, debt bonds, people pawning their possessions. The existence of large-scale debt was so integral to society that the Buddhist rules.
They explicitly forbade debtors from joining the monastic sangha until their debts were fully paid.
Otherwise, the Sangha would have just become a haven for economic fugitives.
So this specialized currency-based economy fundamentally shifted the social power structure. It created new elites of wealth, distinct from the old hereditary warrior and priestly classes.
We see the rise of two crucial new social leaders. First, the Gaudapati. This term traditionally means the head of the household, but in the Buddhist texts, it evolves into a specific designation for a wealthy property owner, primarily associated with land and agriculture.
They controlled the means of production outside the city walls.
Exactly. And the second was the Sethi.
The urban financier.
The Sethi, or Sreshtin in Sanskrit, was the high-level businessman, tied directly to trade, commerce, and usury. They lived lavishly in the capital cities. And the most powerful individuals combined these roles. They were called Sethi Gahapati.
A man who controlled both the rural agricultural wealth and the urban commercial base.
And we can confirm their vast affluence by looking at their clientele.
Right. Figures like the famed royal physician Jivaka had clients among kings and the Sethigapatis. The sources detail medical bills amounting to thousands of kapapanas.
A massive, almost unbelievable sum of money that only these new, economically powerful elites could afford to pay.
Finally, this network of wealth required vast arteries for its movement. The trade routes of this period unified the subcontinent.
The trade network was massive, operating as combined land and river routes. The primary artery was the Uttarapatha, the northern route. This stretched from Taxila and Gandhara in the far northwest across the entire Indo-Gangetic plain all the way to the port of Tambralikti on the Bay of Bengal.
And we know how vital this route was because of the archaeological evidence we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The distribution of NBPW pottery corroborates this route perfectly, and luxury goods moved along it. Lapis lazuli, sourced from Afghanistan, is found across this vast stretch. Silver, which was necessary for the punchmark coins, also flowed through this system. And the second great route ensured the Magadhan heartland wasn't isolated from the resources of the south. That was the Dakshinapatha, the southern route. This linked the Magadhan capital Pataliputra to Pradesthana on the Godavari River, effectively connecting the core Ganga Valley with the Deccan and western ports,
which facilitated the crucial movement of raw materials, especially iron and copper, across the difficult Vindhya mountains.
And for the Sethis who financed and controlled this trade, Vanilla commerce was recognized as one of the highest and most respected occupations, which just cemented their social rise.
The economic engine we just described was running on a very volatile social structure. The core conflict of society during this age was the tension between the ideal fourfold Varna system and the emerging complex reality of jati, or caste. The Brahmanical ideal was rigid, society defined by birth into the four Varnas: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. This was a theoretical hierarchy based on divine sanction, but the economic reality of urbanization and specialized hereditary occupations was creating hundreds, if not thousands, of specific occupational groups or jatis.
Right, so how did the Brahmanical tradition try to explain this explosion of new occupational groups that didn't fit neatly into their four original categories?
They came up with the highly defensive concept of Varna Samkara.
A mixture of Varnas. This theory claimed that these new jatis arose from improper permutations of intervarna marriages. For example, a child born to a Brahmana man and a Kshatriya woman might form one new jati, a child of a Kshatriya man and a Shudra woman another.
So it was basically a justification for a social reality that the fourfold system just couldn't contain anymore.
Exactly. Social identity was increasingly local and occupational, regardless of the overarching theory. The sources show that while people were frequently identified as Brahmanas or Kshatriyas,
people often weren't simply called Vaishya or Shudra.
Instead, they were identified by their precise hereditary profession: carpenter, weaver, merchant, potter, which was tied to their specific jati and their lineage, their kula. Identity was driven by what you did, not just the rigid theological class you theoretically belonged to.
And this hardening of occupational and lineage identity meant that prejudice against the lowest strata became institutionalized and incredibly severe.
The chandalas, often associated with tasks considered impure, like corpse disposal or execution, represented the absolute lowest boundary of the system. The Brahmanical Dharma Sutras codified extreme prejudice and elaborate pollution rules against them.
The Apastamba Dharma Sutra is particularly telling. What did it prescribe for those who came into contact with the chandala?
It stated that mere contact with a chandala required the person to immediately plunge into water to cleanse themselves. Even more dramatically, if you merely saw a chandala from afar, you were ritually required to look immediately at luminous bodies in the heavens, the sun, moon, or stars, to purify your sight and ward off the pollution.
Wow, that reflects the severity of the social alienation facing these groups.
And the systemic stratification went hand in hand with the strict strengthening of patriarchy, which was largely fueled by the shift toward private property.
The move toward land ownership and transferable wealth necessitated strict patriarchal authority within the household, the kula.
This was essential to ensure the smooth patrilineal transmission of property. It had to pass from father to son to ensure the continuity of the lineage and the performance of necessary funerary rites. that Grihapati was the undisputed master of his domain.
And the texts show that marriage customs themselves were incredibly varied, reflecting a chaotic social reality that the prescriptive texts really struggled to control.
The Buddhist Vinaya Pitaka lists 10 different kinds of unions prevailing at the time. This includes traditional marriage by ceremony, but also transactional marriages where a woman was bought by money, dhanakita, and those resulting from violence, such as being captured in a raid, dajahata.
It shows the full spectrum of actual practices, from ceremonial to coercive.
And the Brahmanical Dharma Sutras try to impose order by ranking these practices, which resulted in the 8 types of marriage.
They rank them from the most approved, like the Brahma marriage gifting an adorned daughter to a learned man, all the way down to the worst.
And the fact that they had to classify types like the Rakshasa marriage by capture or the abhorrent Paishacha, seducing a woman while she's intoxicated or unconscious, suggests that these practices were common enough in the broader society that the lawgivers felt compelled to define and condemn them.
In terms of property rights, we know inheritance was strictly patrilineal, where women just left completely destitute.
Inheritance of the deceased man's primary property was absolutely patrilineal, yes, excluding wives and daughters. However, the one important exception was Stridhana.
And this was movable property and gifts.
Jewelry, clothing, small movable assets received by the woman, particularly at the time of her marriage. This property was exclusively hers and generally passed from mother to daughter, providing women with a small but crucial sphere of financial autonomy.
The ideal of female subordination prescribed during this time is powerfully and frankly disturbingly illustrated by the Buddha's discourse on the 7 kinds of wives.
This anecdote comes from the Anguttara Nikaya, and it's directed at Sujata, the difficult daughter-in-law of the wealthy patron and of the Pendika. The Buddha seeks to counsel her on how to be a proper wife, outlining 7 types she could choose to emulate.
So tell us about the 3 wives who were destined for misery and destruction.
These were the Vahaka, or slayer wife, who is cruel and murderous, the Korasama, or thief-like wife, who misappropriates her husband's money, and the Ayasama, or mistress-like wife, who is lazy and ignores her duties. These 3 were destined for a rebirth in hell.
The 4 approved wives were destined for heaven. They included the mother-like, sister-like, and companion-like, but the ideal choice Sujata makes is the final 4th type.
The final type is the Dasisama, the slave-like wife. And the text description of this ideal is truly telling of the patriarchal standard being prescribed. This wife is defined as calm, patient, obedient.
And one who, in the text's own words, meekly accepts her husband's beating and remains without resentment.
And Sujata, advised by the Buddha, chooses to become the slave-like wife.
That image of the ultimate wealthy wife, adopting the position of the most abject subordination, powerfully reflects the ideal standard of obedience that the male composers of these texts prescribed for women. It's a stunning, clear glimpse into the strengthening of patriarchal control. The tension we keep coming back to is this. You have the creation of immense material wealth, the hardening of social classes, and running parallel to that, an intense philosophical movement advocating the complete rejection of all wealth and all social ties. This is the age of the Shramana movement.
The Shramana movement, literally, one who strives, was an explicit radical alternative to the conventional householder life and the Brahmanical sacrificial system. And it was open to all classes and genders and sought liberation through personal effort and ethical conduct.
And the intellectual landscape was highly contested. The sources show this dizzying array of competing philosophical positions vying for the attention of kings and settas.
We should briefly mention the radical doctrines that didn't survive in the same way, like those of Purana Kassapa and Macaulay Gosala.
Purana Kassapa advocated a doctrine of non-consequence.
Moral nihilism. No matter how good or bad the action, it resulted in no spiritual merit or demerit. Macaulay Gosala, the leader of the Ajivikas, advocated strict determinism, or niyati, arguing that everything, including the destiny of the soul, was fixed and determined over millennia, rendering human effort completely irrelevant.
These movements confirm that philosophical skepticism and radical positions were thriving.
Oh, absolutely. But ultimately, 2 major traditions survived and flourished in this Magadhan environment: Buddhism and Jainism. Let's start with early Buddhism. The core of the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma, is expressed in the 4 Noble Truths. The focus is entirely on the practical path to liberation. The existence of suffering, dukkha, its cause, which is craving or trishna, its removal, nirodha, and the 8-fold path to achieve that removal. And this path is the middle path, designed to avoid the extremes of self-indulgence and severe, unnecessary asceticism.
The goal is nibbana, the extinction of attachment, desire, and the illusion of self. And what's remarkable is that the teaching itself is presented as a means to an end, not an end in itself. This is perfectly captured by the famous raft analogy from the Majjhima Nikaya.
The Buddha teaches that the Dhamma is like a raft you use to cross a dangerous river to the safe, far shore of liberation. Once you have reached that far shore, you do not carry the raft on your head, you beach it and walk on.
The teaching is for the purpose of crossing over, and once liberation is achieved, even the philosophical framework can be relinquished.
But while the philosophy was universal, the operation of the Sangha, the monastic order, still had to respect the secular world it sought to transcend.
This is where the social stance is really subtle. The Sangha was theoretically socially inclusive, providing a revolutionary spiritual path for all, but the rules for entry were designed to minimize disruption to the state and the social order.
The Vinaya Pitaka specified that debtors had to pay their debts before joining. Slaves had to be freed by their masters, and crucially, soldiers needed the king's express permission to renounce their duties.
This shows the Sangha accepting the necessity of the political status quo.
It does.
And what space did this spiritual revolution carve out for women?
It was pioneering for its time. The ultimate spiritual goal, Nibbana, was declared achievable for women. The establishment of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of nuns, was a monumental step.
Although the Buddha initially resisted until he was convinced by his aunt, Mahapajapati Gautami, and his disciple Ananda.
But the path was structurally subordinated from the very beginning.
Unfortunately, yes. Despite the immense spiritual achievements of the nuns celebrated in the Therigatha, the verses of elder nuns, the establishment of the Bhikkhuni Sangha came with the imposition of 8 special rules that permanently placed nuns in a subordinate relationship to monks.
For instance, a nun, even if she had been ordained for a century, had to treat a newly ordained monk with deference. And the text retained negative stereotypes of women as temptresses or obstacles, reflecting the patriarchal society from which the movement sprang.
Let's transition to early Jainism, a tradition whose historical figure, Mahavira, was a contemporary of the Buddha.
Mahavira was the 24th Tirthankara, or forward builder. And Jainism is distinguished by a profound commitment to nonviolence and a really sophisticated metaphysical view of reality.
Their philosophical doctrines regarding reality are particularly challenging to grasp. Let's talk about Anekantavada and Syadavada.
Anekantavada means the manifold nature of reality. It posits that reality is incredibly complex, possessing multiple and sometimes contradictory aspects simultaneously. No single viewpoint can capture the whole truth.
And Syadavada is the logical framework for that.
The doctrine of maybe, or assertability, yes. It insists that all statements about reality are relative, only true in some respect, Syadeva. This rejection of a single, absolute dogmatic view of reality was a direct and fierce critique of the competing philosophical schools that all claim to have absolute knowledge.
And their understanding of karma is radically different from the Buddhist concept of, say, psychological conditioning.
Jainism posits that karma is literal, material particles, known as pudgala. These particles are physically attracted to and adhere to the soul, the jiva, obscuring its naturally infinite consciousness and bliss.
So salvation, or moksha, requires 2 things.
Stopping the influx of new karmic particles, samvara, through ethical rigor, and wearing out the existing particles, nirjara, often through severe fasts and ascetic practices. This literal material view of karma is what drives the absolute centrality of extreme non-injury, ahimsa. Ahimsa is the first and most sacred vow. For Jaina monks, this is taken to its most extreme logical conclusion. It extends non-injury even to single-sense bodies, ekandriya life forms, that only possess the sense of touch.
These include earth bodies, water bodies, fire bodies, and air bodies.
Which explains why Jaina monks wear masks, sweep the ground, and cannot light fire.
Exactly. A Jaina monk must not dig the earth, must avoid bathing or walking in the rain to protect water bodies, and must not light fires to protect fire and air bodies, all to avoid harming these infinitesimal beings.
And this commitment to non-injury strictly ruled out several major professions for monastic and devout lay life.
Specifically, agriculture and governing.
Agriculture was impossible due to tilling the soil and killing insects. Governing and warfare were out because of the necessary violence. Consequently, trade, Vanivya, and finance emerged as the preferred occupation for the affluent Jain laity. This allowed them to accumulate the wealth necessary to support the monastic order while remaining as non-injurious as possible in their daily work.
Finally, the two major Jaina sects, Digambara and Shvetambara, divide dramatically over the issue of gender and salvation.
This is a defining historical split. The Digambaras, the sky-clad or naked, strictly follow the tradition of Mahavira's complete nudity. They argue that clothes are possessions that must be renounced.
And since social constraints prevent a woman from going naked in public, her body is inherently an obstacle to liberation.
Thus, Digambara doctrine insists women cannot attain moksha until they are reborn as men.
But the Shvetambaras hold a more inclusive view and even cite a female Tirthankara.
The Shvetambaras, the white-clad, wear simple white robes and accept that women can and do attain moksha in their current female bodies. They cite Mali, the 19th Tirthankara, who they believe was female.
But even within that more liberal view,
even there, the tradition often attributes Maigali's female birth to a previous act of cheating or misbehavior, reflecting that negative stereotypes and historical bias against female power persisted even among those who affirmed their spiritual equality.
this has been an intense, profound deep dive. As we synthesize this entire period, we see the political, economic, and philosophical revolutions all happening simultaneously, creating this immense internal tension.
We saw a political trajectory where aggressive monarchies like Magadha, fueled by resource control and military innovation, those mace chariots, systematically overcame the older kinship-based oligarchies.
And this resulted in the foundation of empire and unprecedented material wealth, powered by cities, specialized labor, vast trade routes, and the introduction of money.
And yet running parallel to this feverish material accumulation was the profound philosophical revolution of the Shrammanas, Buddhism and Jainism, who taught that the entire system of accumulation, desire, and social hierarchy was merely the source of suffering and spiritual bondage.
So the period established the foundations for the most materially expansive empire the subcontinent had yet seen.
Yet, its most lasting cultural contributions taught that the greatest achievement was not the acquisition of wealth or power, but its total renunciation. And that enduring tension between the drive for material accumulation and the ideal of ascetic detachment continues to shape India today.
So what does this all mean for us today, looking back at this foundation period?
Well, consider the ultimate paradox we found. The rise of the wealthy Gahapati, the landowner, and the merchant Sethi, the financier, was enabled by this explosive, ruthless economic system of trade and currency. These new elites, flush with Kahapanas and seeking spiritual merit, became the crucial financial patrons, the danas, that funded the construction of the sanghas and monasteries.
So the very class that materially powered the empire and benefited most from prosperity was simultaneously channeling its vast wealth into spiritual movements that explicitly demanded the absolute renunciation of that same wealth and social power.
They outsourced their salvation by funding the ascetics who condemned their source of power.
A true cycle of spiritual outsourcing and patronage, powered by silver coins and the desire for freedom. The birth of empire and the yearning for liberation forged together in the same fertile Ganga Valley.
Exactly. And the seeds of both are still growing.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into North India, c. 600-300 BCE. We hope you feel thoroughly informed and perhaps a little inspired to look at your own sources of power and prosperity through this ancient contradictory lens.